a church community that can just do that song on call. So, hey, guys, that was beautiful. All right, well, anyway, so this was for Tony. Tony asked me a question a long time ago when I said, hey, guys, if you got a question, let me know. And I thought, hey, you know what? Let's talk about this tonight. So, guys, I'm going to try my best to answer a question that Tony asked me, and we're going to dive into it. And Tony's question was, would we know each other and be able to communicate with each other in heaven when we die? All right? Now, interesting, guys, all right? So if you don't normally join us for Sunday nights are kind of like, like a potluck, all right? We talk about a lot of different things. And sometimes we dive into specific questions, and sometimes we go through a book just like we do on Sunday mornings. But I kind of want to dive into this tonight. And I just want to kind of start off by saying, look, church, I'm going to be honest with you. The Bible isn't super clear about what life is like after death or what even happens after death. The Bible's not clear about it, all right? And I know a lot of people like to think it is, guys, but it's not exactly clear. Now, we kind of maybe get little hints about some possibilities here and there, but, guys, there is no clear teaching about what heaven is like in the afterlife. Like I said, we get glimpses, maybe in Revelation in some places, but there's no clear, I guess I want to say there's no clear doctrine. None of the New Testament writers or Old Testament writers say, all right, when you die, this is what's going to happen. Step one, this is what's going to happen. And then after that, there's nothing in the Bible that talks about that, guys. And the things we do know, like I said, are like little hints here and there. And one of these so-called little hints that we might pull something out of would be in Matthew chapter 17. Now, all of these passages we're going to go to, we're going to go to 3 passages, guys. And a lot of these passages that we're going to go to are things that we studied before. They're not going to be new ideas to probably most of us. But I want to tell you guys some of the things that people say. And then at the very end, I'm going to give you a what could we, what should we do with this. All right? So anyway, like I said, the Bible is not super crystal clear about any of this, okay? All right, and this could spawn like 3 other sermons if we wanted it to, guys. All right, but let's start in Matthew chapter 17, okay? All right, so Jesus and his disciples traveled to the top of a high mountain, all right? And it's sometimes known as the Mount of Transfiguration, okay? So let's kind of read this, Matthew 17, beginning of verse 1. It says, so 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and his brother John, led them high up into a mountain by themselves. All right? And he, Jesus, was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became bright as light. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah, talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it's good for us to be here. If you wish, I'll set up 3 tents here. One for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. And while he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, Get up, don't be afraid. And when they raised their eyes, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. Okay, now guys, so here is Jesus' famous transfiguration. And guys, we can notice some things right now. Remember, we're trying to find out, like I said, Tony asked, trying to find out, will we recognize each other? And guys, will we be able to communicate with each other, okay? So the first thing that we notice is that Moses and Elijah, long dead, appeared and were recognized as Moses and Elijah. The disciples present knew who they were. So we might say, yes, we will know each other if we take this passage literally. And the passage also indicates that after the transfiguration, when the transfiguration happens, Moses and Elijah, it says, were talking to Jesus, which definitely indicates these long dead people were communicating with Jesus, although what they talked about is not mentioned. So it begs the question, you guys, this is one of the passages that a lot of people go to when they talk about this subject, all right? So it begs the question, does this show that after we die, we are communicating and we know each other? All right? And it seems to, because these guys are dead and they're talking and everybody knows who they are. Okay? But Jesus also talks about this as a vision in verse 9. He says, this wasn't in the passage, but if you read the next verse, he says, don't tell anybody about the vision you just saw until after the Son of Man has been resurrected. So guys, this could be something, it could be a vision. Guys, if it's a vision, what does that mean? What's the difference between what happened? I don't know, guys. I don't know. Okay? Is it like a dream? Did they see a dream? Did what happened literally happen in front of them? I don't know, guys. And one of the things I want to stress every time I read the Bible is I want to stress this, guys. Why did the writer think that this was an important event to include in telling their gospel, their good news, right? Who's writing this? Matthew. Who's Matthew preaching to? A Jewish audience, right? Jews that struggled with Gentiles that struggled with the law of Moses. And guys, I think the reason why Matthew chose to include this account, all right, is he's trying to show people Jesus, Moses, and Elijah all appeared, but who did God say listen to? Jesus. Now, guys, what does that mean? Does that mean we can look at this and say that people are communicating and people are talking? Maybe. But guys, I always want us to be mindful and ask the question, am I reading this like Matthew wanted me to read this? Am I getting out of this what Matthew wanted me to get out of this? Does that make sense, church? So guys, it seems, and we're going to get to this in a second, all right? Okay? I've got good news at the end, okay? All right, but I always want us to think about these things. But like I said, it's clear that they're communicating, and Moses and Elijah are dead, and everybody knows who they are. Makes sense? Okay. So guys, now, this kind of brought me to something else that is also another passage that people often go to when they talk about communication after the dead and being resurrected from the dead. Guys, it's in 1 Samuel chapter 28, and I know some of us in here know this story very well. King Saul is on the run from David, and he does not know what's going to happen, right? So if you don't know, guys, in the book of Samuel, Saul is the first king of Israel, and they weren't supposed to have a king, but God said, look, I'll give you a king. Here you go. This is your king right here. And then Saul displeased God, and then God gave his kingdom to David. And Saul doesn't like that, and he's trying to fight with David, and he doesn't want to give up the kingdom. And out of desperation and on the run in fear of David, he goes to what is called the witch of Endor. A witch! He goes to a medium, some biblical sources say a medium, some translations, but somebody that deals with summoning the dead or speaking to the dead or communicating with the dead. And let's go to, guys, 1 Samuel 28, and we're going to begin in verse 11. Okay? So the woman, like I said, in some versions she's a witch, in some versions she's a medium. But the woman, this witch of Endor, said, who do you want me to bring up for you? And Saul said, bring up Samuel for me. Now Samuel was a prophet, all right, guys, a prophet of Israel that was heavily involved in leading Israel and then anointing Saul as king and then David as king. He's just a very prominent person, and he'd already died. And when the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. And the woman said to Saul, why have you deceived me? You're Saul, you're the king. And the king said to her, have no fear. What do you see? And the woman said to Saul, I see a divine being coming up out of the ground. And he said to her, what does he look like? What's his appearance? And she said, an old man's coming up. He's wrapped in a robe. So Saul knew that it was Samuel. And he bowed with his face to the ground, and he did obeisance. Obeisance is like, bowing down to a king, right? Showing honor. So then Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? And Saul answered, I'm in great distress. The Philistines are warring against me, and God has turned away from me and answers me no more, either by prophets or dreams. So I summoned you to tell me what I should do. And Samuel said, why then do you ask me, since the Lord has turned from you and become your enemy? The Lord has done to you just as he spoke by me. For the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord and did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek. Therefore the Lord has done this thing to you today. Moreover, the Lord will give Israel along with you into the hands of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. The Lord will also give the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines. Okay, guys. So this is often another Bible verse, guys, that people go to when they talk of such things, and they have questions. All right, so guys, it's an interesting account here. The witch brings up Samuel. Brings up. What does that mean? All right, I don't know. Who do you want me to bring up from the dead, I guess? All right. And, guys, Saul clearly knows it's Samuel. Remember, he was like, hey, who do you see? And then she describes Samuel, and he knows who Samuel is. So he just falls down, and he bows down so he recognizes Samuel for who Samuel is. And then Samuel and Saul have a full-on conversation, right? There is communication, all right? Samuel and Saul have a conversation. Saul tells Samuel about he's distressed. The Philistines are coming, right? David has been given the kingdom. And Saul's like, why are you calling me? I said this was going to happen. I don't know why you're shocked about all this, all right? So Samuel's like, what do you think was going to happen? And they have this conversation. And then Samuel gives Saul some bad news. Yeah, God's given the kingdom to your enemy David. All right? So once again, guys, what we have here is communication. All right? This, Samuel's long dead and he's talking. All right? And then Saul's listening and he's communicating back and forth. All right? So once again, guys, we seem to have some kind of recognition here. Okay? Once again, guys, what is the writer of 1 Samuel trying to get forth in this passage? I don't know. All right? But clearly in this passage, you've got recognition and communication with the dead. All right? And remember, we're trying to find out, do we recognize each other? Can we communicate, after we're dead? Great questions, right? So here we have some evidence of that, right? But once again, guys, I always want us to ask the question, am I reading this like, through ancient eyes, okay? Now, guys, there's one other passage I want to go to, guys, and it's probably the passage that people go to. Guys, I have seen diagrams on the internet. I've seen, steps on the internet with pictures and arrows, this, and then this, and then this. I've seen entire systems drawn up about this one verse, okay? And, guys, once again, it's something that we studied when we did the parables of Jesus. We did the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, right? And this is something that people jump to and they say, this is what this says. So, guys, let's look at Luke 16, all right, the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. Now, before this, guys, Jesus is talking a lot of parables to his disciples, and we'll talk about what he's talking about here in a second, but he's got a very specific thing he's going through his disciples with in these parables that you read in Luke 16. So let's go to Luke 16, verse 19. It says, this is Jesus, he says, there was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come lick his sores. And the poor man died and was carried away by angels to be with Abraham. And the rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was being tormented, he lifted up his eyes and he saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. And he called out, Father Abraham, have mercy on me. Send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, or I'm in agony in these flames. But Abraham said, Child, remember that during your lifetime you received good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things. But now he's comforted here, and you are in agony. Besides all this, between you and us is this great chasm that's been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can cross from there to us. And he said, Then I beg you, Father, to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, and he can warn them, so that they will not also come into this place of torment. Then Abraham replied, They've got Moses and the prophets. They should listen to them. And he said, No, Father Abraham, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent. And he said to them, If they don't listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced if someone even rises from the dead. Okay. All right, guys. So guys, here Jesus is telling the parable of a wealthy guy that lived a good life and a really poor guy named Lazarus that lived a really rough life. And when they died, the rich man went to Hades, and Lazarus went to be with Abraham and was carried away by the angels. Now, real quick, let's talk about the word Hades here. All right? Guys, what is Hades in Greek culture? It is the realm of the dead. That's it. It's not a heaven. It's not a hell. It's in Greek culture. What language is the New Testament written in? Greek. Okay? So guys, now it's interesting, guys, that Jesus talks about Hades here as a place of afterlife. Like I said, it wasn't a place of reward or punishment. It was just a place that existed, like where people went when they died. The Jewish equivalent of this place is Sheol. Sheol. What is Sheol? It's just a place. It's just a place that the Hebrews describe as where you go is when you die. Nobody ever in the Old Testament describes it as a great place where you go and have a good time, or where you die and you burn and you get punished. Nobody describes it like that in the Old Testament. It's just a place where you go when you die. So it's interesting, guys, that he says Hades here. Now, there are words for the place of torment, Gehenna, Tartarus, but Jesus doesn't use those words. He uses Hades. So it's interesting. Okay? So you might think, oh, one guy's in hell. No, there's a different word for that. And clearly Jesus didn't use that word. He used the realm of the dead. Okay? Interesting. Just a thought. Okay? So, now, clearly they were in different places, though. They were both in the afterlife. He went to Hades, the realm of the dead, and he went to be with Abraham. And it's not specific what that means, but he just went to be with Abraham. And the rich man was being tormented, and Lazarus was being comforted. And the rich man recognized Lazarus and shouted across some kind of uncrossable chasm and asked him, hey, just dip your finger in some water and put it in my mouth. And Abraham says, look, you can't cross this chasm. And the rich man says, well, go tell my family. And he says, look, if they didn't believe Moses and the prophets, they ain't going to believe it, even if a person rises from the dead. Now, here's one of the problems I have with this parable that's been used in the past. With any parable, guys, just like we've already asked, we have to ask ourselves, what point was Jesus trying to make here? Okay? Always ask this when we're studying the Bible. Was Jesus telling this parable to show his followers what happened after death? Was that the purpose of Jesus telling this parable? No, I don't think it was, all right? I mean, if you read the other parables, there's clearly something going on that Jesus is talking about. And it's not about what happens when you die. Okay? Jesus was trying to teach his followers not what happens when you die, but how to live the life you're living right now, alive. And guess what, guys? The purpose of the parable is, it's to teach the stubborn, hard-hearted people like the Pharisees that are wealthy and behaving like the rich man. They are neglecting the poor. And he's saying, don't be like that rich man. Look at that rich man. He's got this poor guy at his gate. And he doesn't do anything for him. He just lets the dogs lick his sores, and that's what happened. That is the purpose of the parable. All right? And at the very end, he says, hey, if they don't listen to Moses and the prophets, once again, he's referring to the Pharisees and how they treat the poor, they're not even going to listen to a man that rises from the dead. So, guys, the law of Moses specifically mandated caring for the poor, and the Pharisees weren't doing it. And that is why Jesus was telling this parable. So, guys, that begs the question to me, can I take this parable and make an afterlife doctrine out of it? Guys, I don't feel comfortable doing that. I don't feel comfortable because I don't think that's what the purpose of the parable was. Does that make sense, guys? I don't want to take that out of context. Okay? All right? So, but I do want to stress, guys, there is clear recognition and communication of the dead that are present in that parable. Okay? Now, guys, here's where I want to kind of end with this tonight, guys. Obviously, Revelation mentions several visions of heaven where angels or beings are singing praise to God. There's communication, right? And clearly, there is going on. So, guys, if I had to answer the question, will we know each other when we die, and will we be able to communicate with each other? Guys, here's what I think I would say. Now, I'm going to say this slowly because I realized last time, I figured out I was writing this like I was writing a master's paper in my history. Right? So let me kind of break down. Here's what I would say. I would say, although there is no explicit teaching where the intention of a New Testament writer or Old Testament writer, with their intention, guys, was to talk about the specifics of the afterlife. Guys, I think it goes without being said that in Jesus' illustrations and in the words of writers of the Bible, communication in the afterlife as well as recognition of each other was just understood. It wasn't a question. Does that make sense? They wrote in such a way that was never a question of are we going to communicate and are we going to know each other. It was just understood. Does that make sense, guys? Because every time they wrote about the afterlife, there were people talking and there were people knowing each other. So what I'm trying to tell you, church, is the Bible never comes out and says, now here's what's going to happen. But the writers of the Bible, even Jesus' parables, imply that that's just the way it is. So if I had to tell somebody, would we know each other? I would say yes. I would say absolutely. That was pretty much just understood. There's this phrase, guys, that I know we know. It goes without being said, right? And to many of the biblical writers, things just went without being said. They wouldn't look at the Witch of Endor conjuring up Samuel and think that was weird that they were talking. They'd be like, well, yeah, of course. The people that listened to Jesus' parable wouldn't have said, why are Abraham and this guy talking? Or they would have just said, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's the afterlife. So what I'm trying to tell you is, guys, that all of the writers imply that, yes, that's what happens. Of course you can communicate. Of course you'll know each other. Not a question. Does that make sense? Now I will say this, guys. We have to be careful about asking questions like this in the Bible because there's that word I always tell you about, that biblical scholar word, eisegesis. Okay? Eisegesis, guys, is where we have a question in the Bible, and we already have our minds kind of made up on what the answer is. And we try to look at the Bible and we say, ooh, this fits what I already think. Alright, guys? That's called proof texting. It's basically saying, I'm going to make the Bible fit my beliefs. Guys, that's not a good way to read the Bible. Alright? The good way to read the Bible, in my opinion, guys, is what's called exegesis. It's trying to say, what were these writers trying to tell me? Not what do I want these writers to say. What are they trying to tell me? So guys, that's what I want to be cautious of when a question comes up like this. I personally would avoid creating a doctrine of the afterlife. If somebody asked me something specific, I wouldn't be like, well, the Bible clearly says this, this, and this is going to happen, and this, and this, and this. Because the writers of the Bible don't say those things. Does that make sense, church? So I personally would avoid doing that, all right? Because that's not something that the writers explicitly talked about. It's just something that was just kind of understood. It's really weird when you read the New Testament of the Bible, you don't see the things that we want to know. Paul, tell us this. I don't care about these guys, with prostitutes. I want to know about this. And Paul talks about all, these other great things, but some of the things that we want to know in 2024, it was just understood. And that's why the writers didn't write about it, because, well, yeah, of course. Of course they talk in the afterlife. Of course we know each other. It was just understood. So if you had to ask me, simple answer, yes, of course we can communicate. Of course we're going to know each other. But if you're going to ask me the complicated answer, I'd be like, yes, but let's be careful. Does that make sense, church? All right? Am I confusing? I feel like this is a Bible class. Thoughts, comments.
I was going to ask.
No, please.
Afterwards, but I'll ask it now if I can.
Yes.
So I was always taught growing up that, it is a fine line, we don't really know, but I was always taught that there's no sorrow in heaven.
That's a biblical verse.
So if we don't see our loved ones there, they're not in heaven, and how can you not be sad?
A great question.
Not everybody goes to heaven.
I don't know the answer. Well, I don't know the answer to that. And I will say, I've heard, and here's the thing, I don't know the answer to that. And I've heard preachers come up with their own little answer to that. But I don't know. That's a good question. I will say this, Patty. One of the things I am constantly astounded by is the forgiveness of God.
Yes.
All right? I am astounded. What did Paul say in Romans? Paul said that Adam sinned and everybody paid for it. And then he said, how much more does Christ forgive? how much more does the blood of Jesus? So that's to me is saying, if Adam condemned everybody, but Christ redeems more than everybody, once again. So, I don't know, Patty, but I can tell you, I am astounded by the goodness and the forgiveness of God. And that is why I always say, you let God do those things, and let's never do God's job. All right? But that's a great question, Patty. And like
It's
I said,
just something that I always do with parents. Like, you know, we
yeah,
always talk about
Patty, I've heard that conversation over and over. I heard it at a Las Vegas preacher in the Las Vegas Church of Christ. When my dad died, we were talking to him, and at the time it was comforting what he said. But as I got older, I was like, that is not a biblical idea that that guy taught. He's doing his best. We're all doing our best. But I want to stick to, guys, what I know. I just don't know.
Yeah.
None of us do. You know, what were you going to say, John?
Oh, I was just saying, I was agreeing with Patty, because, you always think that about your parents, especially.
Oh, yeah.
Because you have to wonder. But then again, the passage is about the number of marriage, forgiving in marriage. I don't know how that goes into, fits into that.
Well, once again, I know that God is far more forgiving than I can even understand.
Yeah, that's
And I'm going to let God be God, and
I will sing of the goodness of God.
exactly,
There we go.
And like I said, guys, that's the thing. And
I agree.
there are so many, and I'm not trying to criticize, but there are so many people I have seen that just come up with these elaborate eisegesis. It's like, this is our box, right? And they're like, that verse out there is outside my box, so I'm going to rope it, and I'm going to be like, and yank it into my box and make it say something that it's not meant to say. So, yeah, I don't know. Any other thoughts? Good.
Well, I just know when my mom was dying and she had a stroke, and it was like a day before she died. I know that she saw my dad and my two brothers, because there was only one expression that was set aside for them, and she was seeing it. It's like, that was a really amazing moment to know that she could see them.
That was a God moment that none of us experienced and that you experienced.
Same thing with my sister, when my mom passed away, she was holding one arm and I had the other one, and she said all of a sudden she felt this tremendous rush of joy, and it was just unreal. Wow.
So guys,
Yeah, I know, it may be different from each person.
and like I said, I am astounded by the forgiveness of God and the mercy of God.
We're going to be surprised one day to find out that
I think so
probably
too, John.
we went a little bit overboard.
John, I know Christians went a little bit overboard. I know they did. All right, like I said, I know these guys in the 1500s that were murdering each other in the name of Christ. They're gonna be like, ooh, we shouldn't have done. Okay, I get it. No, but guys, have comfort. Like I said, guys, that's all I can say. Is just God's mercy is far greater than we can even think about. And that doesn't mean we should not do what we feel the Bible calls us to do, but that does mean that we're not perfect, and we're not going to be perfect. And even if we do what the Bible calls us to do, we can't do everything perfectly. All right, that's why Paul says, Jesus came because nobody can keep the law. Right? Yeah.
So where do you think people think that evil came from?
Selena.
That's another lesson.
That's another lesson.
Yeah.
That's another lesson.
From a goodness and evil, because God, He made it all. He made the world.
Yes.
He's put us in this world.
Yeah.
Selena, that is maybe a 5-part series right there. and Selena, look, I'll be honest with you, it's something that I've studied a little bit about. Like, I have these same questions.
2 words, free will.
That there is free will,
Yes, it is.
Sure.
He has that free will.
Sure.
He really did. So, because if he hadn't, and we hadn't needed that forgiveness of sin, he would have never put in place Jesus, that seed that was coming.
Okay.
He would never. So I'm thinking, Jesus made the goodness and he made the bad, but we have that free will he just mentioned about that
Well,
we have to choose.
Well, like I said, that is a topic that, boy, do Bible scholars have a lot to say about that one. Rob.
I was just gonna say, that God creates it, so.
Guys, look, there are all kinds of
You can go do
wormholes.
something crap.
And guys, you want to know the answer to that? Bible doesn't say. We can speculate. Bible doesn't really say. We can talk about Adam sinning, but the serpent was already there.
I will definitely agree that what I heard as a young man growing up was not what I truly believe now.
Yeah.
I just know how strict that was.
Sure.
compared to what I know is true now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what's up?
Like the way Taylor said, it would cause someone sorrow to not see a loved one in heaven. But what if a loved one were to sin and go to hell, but you didn't know that?
Once again, the Bible is unclear about those kinds of things. Like, there's nothing laid out that answers that question. You know, so I don't know. And rather than try to make something up and try to pull verses that maybe don't mean that, it's a great question. There's so much about things that we don't know. Like, what do we do about this? How, you know, I don't know. And I wouldn't try to throw out an answer. But like I said, yeah, I just like I said, I would just like to stress that one of the things I'm astounded by, the older I get, is the mercy of God. And that was the mercy I was never taught. And that was, you know, we're not going to do this, guys, because we've done enough Philip Yancey books. But guys, Philip Yancey has got an intriguing book called The Jesus I Never Knew. And I think we all probably know who that Jesus was, or what that Jesus was like that he never knew, because of the way he grew up, right? Yeah. But anyway, church, always fun on Sunday night, guys. I love our atmosphere when we get to sit here and talk, guys. But as always, we're going to end with an invitation, guys. If you guys need anything at all, please come forward, guys, as we stand and sing the first verse of Do You Know My Jesus. Have you a heart that's weary, tending a load of care? Are you a soul that's seeking rest from the burden you bear? Do you know my Jesus? Do you know my friend? Have you heard he loves you, and that he will abide till the end?